Ciao friends, and welcome to a new video about DAX. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use useRelationship in a calculated column. UseRelationship is a simple and powerful function that you can use in a measure to activate an inactive relationship. Calculate useRelationship, job done. In a calculated column, things are very different. Activating an inactive relationship in a calculated column proves to be extremely challenging. Indeed, in this video, you are not going to learn useful techniques, because the code is so complex and so intricate that at the end of the video I will tell you not to use useRelationship in a calculated column. With that said, if you take this as a brain teaser, as a DAX brain teaser, then it is extremely useful, because using useRelationship in a calculated column requires understanding most of the intricate concepts in DAX. Expanded tables, context transition, calculate, filters that interact each other, everything is there. So if you are brave enough to follow the full video, you will not learn a useful technique, but understand how to correctly debug a measure and understand exactly why the numbers you see might not be the ones that you expect. Let's get started. Let's start by understanding what is useRelationship for. UseRelationship is useful whenever you have an inactive relationship and you want to activate it on demand. Let's take a look at the model. Here I have a sales table that only contains 5 rows: order date, delivery date, the customer, and then an amount. In the model, I have 2 tables: the sales table with the 5 rows we have seen so far, and the date table. There are 2 relationships between sales and date. The first one is based on the order date, so it links sales and date through the order date. The second relationship is linked through the delivery date. Of the 2 relationships, only one can be active. Indeed, you cannot have multiple relationships active at the same time between 2 tables. Otherwise, the model would become ambiguous. Therefore, one can be active, all the other ones need to be deactivated. The active relationship is the one that is used by default by all of your calculations, unless you use useRelationship to activate the relationship on demand. That's exactly what I did here. I created, based on this model, a report that shows for each customer the sales amount and the delivery amount. The customer is just the customer from the sales table, and this is the year from the date table. Sales amount computes the value of sales using the default relationship. Delivery amount changes the active relationship. If we look at the code of delivery amount, you see that it uses calculate, sum of sales amount, and then useRelationship. UseRelationship is a calculate modifier that changes the active relationship. So for the duration of calculate, the active relationship will be the one between the delivery date and the date. And you see the result here. For some customers like Claire and Marco, they have placed orders in 2020, but the delivery was in 2021. So you see that using useRelationship in a measure is straightforward. But what if we want to use useRelationship in a calculated column? To do that, we will create 2 calculated columns, one that contains the order year and the other one that contains the delivery year. The order year is extremely simple because a calculated column has a row context, and in that row context we can just leverage related. Let's do that. If I want to create a column containing the order year, I only need to go here, create a new column. Let's call it order year, and I just leverage related date year. Related works in the row context of the calculated column and follows the relationship and returns the year. I have the order year, put it in my report, and you see that I have the order year correctly computed. I want to do the same, but I want to compute the delivery year. Therefore, I want to use the delivery date instead of the order date. To do that, I will need to change the active relationship. Now, because we are going to write a lot of different versions of the code, instead of creating the calculated column using Power BI Desktop, I open DAX Studio and we create all the calculated columns in DAX Studio, because there it will be easier to make different tests. So let's open DAX Studio and we define a column straight in the query. Let's just make some space, and our code will be define column sales delivery date. Let me just write 1, so we finish the query, and then we evaluate sales. With the column defined inside the query, you see that the evaluation of sales produces not only the content of sales, but also the delivery date column. Let's expand that a bit, that I define here just as 1. Now, if I want to use relationship, I need to use calculate. So I can write calculate and use related date year. And then I activate use relationship between sales delivery date and date. Same as I did in a measure. Unfortunately, this is not going to work. Before we move further, keep in mind not only this specific column will not work, we will write a lot of different columns that will not work. And we will need to understand the details until we reach a working solution near the end. But let's go back to this code. If I run it, as I anticipated, I just produce an error. And the error says that the column date year either doesn't exist or doesn't have a relationship to any table. The problem is quite common. This error happens every time you reference a column without a valid row context. But actually, we do have a row context in a calculated column. The problem is that we are using calculate. Calculate performs context transition, and as part of the context transition, it invalidates the row context and transforms it into an equivalent filter context. Therefore, inside calculate here, we cannot use the row context. We can just use the filter context. So whatever calculation we will try, it will need to use the filter context. We cannot rely on the row context, and we cannot rely on the row context because we need to use calculate. If we want to use relationship, we need calculate. Calculate destroys the row context. Therefore, we cannot work with the row context. We need to work only with the filter context. So the first question is, can we compute the delivery date only by using the filter context? Well, likely the answer is yes. And to demonstrate you that, we first write an expression that computes the order year with just the filter context, and then we move the same logic in a calculation in the column that computes the delivery year. Let's do that for only the order year. We cannot use related. We are not going to use relationship. Let's compute the order year 2. I can leverage selected value. If I use selected value of date year, selected value is not bound to the row context. Selected value checks if in the current filter context there is only one value visible. And if that is the case, it returns that value. It happens that calculate performs context transition. Context transition filters the expanded sales table that includes date. Therefore, the date year will contain only one value that will be the year of the order of the current row. If I run this query, now you see that I have order year and order year 2 that are totally identical. So I can use just the filter context to compute a year. Let's go back to our delivery year. And we can change that. Now we can use selected value and use relationship to activate the relationship between sales delivery date and date. Let's give that a try. The thing is, if I run it, look at delivery year, it does not contain the delivery year. You can quickly check with this row from Claire and this row from Marco. Here I should see 2021, instead I see 2020, the same value as the order year. It's like I didn't use at all use relationship. Now, why is this happening? The reason is the specific order of calculate. Let's do a quick recap of what calculate does. When you execute calculate, it executes several steps in a very precise order. The first operation that calculate does is the evaluation of filters. The second operation is context transition. Third, the calculate modifiers are applied. And last, the filters evaluated during the first step are applied to the new filter context. So what happens is that the context transition happens before any calculate modifier is being applied. And this is the reason why we have a problem here. Calculate performs context transition before use relationship is taken into account. So after context transition happened, later use relationship will change the active relationship. And as a consequence, this use relationship is ineffective, is not working over this selected value. This selected value is working with a filter context where context transition happened before use relationship was used. Therefore, this version of the code is not yet working. What we need to do is to apply a filter context that performs the same filtering as context transition, but it is not context transition. We need to apply that after select after use relationship did its job. So one option is to use sales. If we use sales as a filter, think about that. Sales, the reference to sales, is the full expanded sales table. Therefore, this reference of sales filters not only the sales table but also the date table, and it will filter the only row that the table is the row context is on. Actually, this is not true. If we run this code, the result is a blank everywhere. Now, why that? What is happening here? Again, we need to remember the order of evaluation. Calculate wakes up. What is the first operation that calculate does? It is not the context transition, it is the evaluation of the filters. And now we do have a filter, sales. So the first operation that calculate does is the evaluation of sales in a filter context that is not currently filtering anything. So this reference to sales contains all the rows in sales. Then context transition happens, then use relationship is activated, and finally the filter is applied. The filter being applied last, it overrides the effect of context transition. Therefore, this selected value is executed in a filter context that shows all the rows in sales. As a consequence, date year does not have a single value and selected value returns a blank. We need to perform context transition here with sales in order to show only one row and not all the rows. So what we can do is use calculate table sales. Now this calculate table will perform context transition induced by calculate table so that sales returns only one row, the current row. And if we run this version of the code, actually we can already do a further step. We embed this calculate table with use relationship. So we compute the selected value of the year. We use calculate table sales so that this sales returns only one row, and we change the active relationship to be the correct one, so that this version of sales actually expands to delivery date and not to order date. If I run this code, the result is kind of strange. You see that we have 2020 here, we have 2021 here, and we have blanks everywhere else. What is happening? Things now are really intricate, and we need to understand very, very well exactly how the filter context is working. Let's focus on this row, the rows where the value, no, let's focus on the rows where the value is correct. What do they have in common? Why is it the case that here and here I have a correct value and here I do not? There should be something special about these rows. And indeed, what is special is the fact that order date and delivery date, they have the very same value. And these are the only two rows where the order date and the delivery date are identical. In all the other cases, the order date is different than the delivery date. So there should be something related to the fact that the two values are not the same. Let's focus on this row. This row contains 26th of December for the order date and 27 for the delivery date. And in order to understand why we have a blank as a result, we need to slow down and follow the evolution of the filter context step by step in the entire calculation. So we start from the outermost part and then we write down the filter context reasoning on top of the different operations that are happening. Likely the answer will be clear. Let's do that. We are outside of everything. So we have just our calculated column. And here we have a row context. The row context contains order date is this row, 26. And delivery date equal to 26. Delivery date is equal to 27. And that is the row context. Actually, I read it better here, just before calculate. Now, calculate wakes up. The first thing that calculate does is it evaluates the filters, and we do have a filter here. This entire calculate table is a filter. Therefore, before doing anything else, the outer calculate calls the inner calculate table. We are here, calculate table is executed in a row context, the original row context we have here. What does calculate table do? Calculate table, first thing, evaluates filters. There are none here. Second step, it performs context transition. So inside here, calculate table creates a filter context that contains the order date 27, delivery date 27, but remember that the context transition happens on the expanded table. So we also have a filter on date. And what is date filtering? Date is part of the expanded table of sales, and the active relationship when the context transition happens is still the one with the order date. So date equals 26. That is good for context transition. Once context transition happened, the calculate table applies the modifier. So it activates the new relationship. Finally, it evaluates sales. So this version of sales is evaluated in a filter context that is filtering order date, delivery date, and also date 26. And where the new relationship is the one between delivery date and date. So focus on that. We have a filter on date, it is 26, and the delivery date is 27. The filter on date between delivery date and date is inconsistent because the date is filtering 26, but the delivery date is filtering 27. It was working earlier because the active relationship was the one with the order date, so the two values were the same. Now things are different. Now the filter on the data is 26, but the value of delivery date is 27. Therefore, this evaluation of sales returns an empty table. Calculate table returns an empty table. Calculate of the selected value returns a blank because it is not seeing anything. The problem is this sales that contains an empty table. The only very special case where you have some value is when the order date is identical to the delivery date. In that case, the filter coming from date will be compatible with the value of the delivery date, and you will filter the row on which you are computing the calculated column. And this is exactly what is happening here and here, where we do have a value. How do we fix that? What we need to do is get rid of the filter on the date, which is coming from the order date. So we want to perform the context transition, but we do not want the filter to reach date. The filter on date will come only from the delivery date. To do that, we need to add a remove filter over date. So what we need to do is get rid of the filter coming from the date. Let me see that. We need to add remove filters over date. What does this remove filter do? Well, calculate table will perform context transition. After context transition, it evaluates use relationship and it evaluates removes filter. Therefore, this part of the filter will be removed, and we will have only a filter containing 26 and 27 for the delivery date, and the result is a table sales that expands to date through the delivery date. And once all this code is working, if I run, now you see that we have the expected result. We have 2021 for the row where the delivery date happened in 2021, here, here, and here. The three rows that received their goods in 2021 actually show 2021. So this version of the code, let me now clear up a bit, is actually computing the correct value, and it is using use relationship in a calculated column. The real question is, does it make any kind of sense to author this kind of code in your working model? Well, the answer is no, a big no, because this code is very intricate, it's hard to follow and extremely easy to break. If you need to retrieve values from a related table and you do have just an inactive relationship, just do not rely on relationships. You can author the very same code using lookup value. Let's see how to do that. Instead of writing all this code, what we can do is just use a lookup value and retrieve the date year. The date year, where the date data is the same as sales delivery date. And that's it. I don't need anything more complex than that. I can run the query and it doesn't work. Why that? Do we have a space? No. Calculate. Oh, I have calculator. My bad. No space here. But we need to get rid of calculator. Okay, now it's working. You see, we have the delivery year, 2021, correctly computed, 2020, correctly computed, just by using lookup value. It is so much simpler, so much effective that there is no point at all in using use relationship inside a calculated column if you want to change the active relationship. With that said, it was interesting to see all the steps needed in order to understand why the numbers were wrong. So as I told you at the beginning, using use relationship in a calculated column is more like a DAX brain teaser than anything really useful. But if you are proficient with DAX, if you understand how expanded table works, and if you just want a puzzle to work with, just try to repeat the entire reasoning by yourself. You will find that it's quite intricate, but at the end you will have practiced a bit with expanded tables, calculate the order of execution of the different steps of calculate. DAX is not an easy language, it's quite intricate. But once you understand the basics and once you understand how to follow all the different steps, then it will provide all the answers the right way. Of course, theory is needed, but that is the reason why I find DAX so interesting. It has a powerful theory at its heart, and once you understand that, you can make it compute everything, even though I know at the beginning all this theory looks like a bit overwhelming. Enjoy DAX!